Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jankyard, the most acclaimed podcast for Ashes Reborn, the hypest extendable card game from Plaid Hat Games. We're here to talk to you about all things Ashes, news, events, the meta, and deck building. And today is a very special episode because we've got the genius behind the curtain, designer Nick Conley, here with us, and we're going to be picking his brain with a bunch of questions from the community. As always, I'm your host, The Treatment, and with me is my sultry-voiced colleague, Schmendrix.
That I've never been called. And I think there's a real danger here in the way in which you throw around compliments, that the very honest compliment that Nick is a genius is going to be confused with the idea that I have a sultry voice. Like, you gotta split the sarcasm and the irony from the truth at times.
No, I'm all praise all the time. And without further ado, welcome Nick Conley.
Hey everyone. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, this is awesome. Very excited. I just want to sort of jump into it and get your thoughts. If you got to see the finals last night for the Phoenix League pod between Killer Cactus and Lark.
I did watch it today. Oh my goodness. What a game.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, it was incredible. Like, what did you think when you were watching the whole game?
I mean, I got absolutely stomped by KC's Herald. He was in my pod, so I knew what that deck was capable of, and was really pleased to see him make it to the finals with that list. I think it was very well deserved, and Lark's deck was just so cool. I mean, we could talk about that a whole bunch. I've been crushed by a bunch of bizarre Lark innovation decks in playtesting. So anytime he shows up with something, I trust that it's something. If I don't understand it, there's a good reason for it. And he really proved his deck building prowess and ability to navigate difficult situations with it. But man, such a tight game. I mean, KC put up the best offense I've seen in a really long time, and having to adapt to the unique situations that the mono illusion deck had there, it was a sight to behold.
I did not have mono illusion deck making the finals on my dance card. That was totally unexpected. And to actually see the list and realize that I think it had 15 reactions, 3 action spells, which were 2 shadows, and no allies. Not a single ally.
I don't even think I'd have the balls to make a list without allies and all reactions. Like, that's just so wild.
Yeah. I want to know why no Shadow Guard. I think that's the biggest question on everyone's mind after seeing that.
Yeah, I kept thinking it's got to come out. And meanwhile, German, he already got to see the list, so he played along. But it was just crazy to me that there wasn't at least one in there.
Yeah, the whole deck was 3x too, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a fresh pre-con.
Yeah, and really the only new card from Viros in Lark's deck was Shadowblade.
Yeah.
Which raises the question, why did you make mono color so overpowered in Illusion specifically with your mono ceremonial expansion, Nick?
Oh boy, just wait for the next mono sets. It's been a really refreshing to see the emphasis on narrowing the amount of colors decks have been going into, the rise in dual cost and even in mono color decks. It's really cool to see. And I think going back through with this red rain cycle here and taking another stab at just kind of what is a core identity of each color is giving us a lot of room to round that out.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how things continue to evolve. And obviously, Ceremonial brought in a bunch of new ideas about using wounds as resources, which I think, we'd gotten hints of with cards like Small Sacrifice, but it was definitely not an idea that was very well built before this cycle. It's been really fun to see its impact.
Yeah, that set is full of wound token support, maybe too much, so who knows, but I think it's safe to say the set has definitely impacted the meta, and those cards are here to stay.
Yeah, so does this mean the mono illusion deck is just going to be a bunch of stinkers to balance out the power inherent in illusion at this point?
Yeah, it seems like it doesn't need anything, right?
Yeah, it's all good.
No, yeah. I haven't done a lot of planning for the illusion deck yet, but I'm looking forward to getting around to it when that comes.
Do you have sort of like everything for Red Rains partially mapped out? Like when you had started with Corpse of Viros, did you already have like, okay, if this is what I'm going to be putting in ceremonial, then down the line, this is what I want for charm and divine and illusion and time? Or do you just sort of like, as you're building it and you just, you just keep generating ideas, you slot them on a brainstorming sheet and then come back to them later?
Yeah, kind of both. So the first thing I had to do was sort the Phoenixborn out into their groupings of 4 that had to be set in stone before I went ahead with any of that. So, and I've seen people speculating what the groupings will be, and I think at least somebody has guessed it right at this point. All the information might be out there. I don't know how solved it is yet, but that was fun to kind of go through the different permutations of that and think about what characters I really wanted to pair up for art and story and stuff. Like the time deck, it has to have Jericho and Rowan in it together as kind of 2 opposing forces in the story. But then, yeah, as for designing cards, I usually just wait for inspiration to strike on a future idea. And if there's like a core idea that comes to mind, I'll jot down some ideas on a draft document and flesh that out as the ideas come. So when time comes to actually begin developing that deck, I have at least some ideas from the past months or whatever that I thought were worthwhile. Like the nature deck is going to have a big focus on alterations, and the charm deck is going to be doing more with charm dice powers. Same with divine. Those were kind of started in the Auric and the Daimona deck using those dice powers, but I think that's a really compelling design space for both of those types to lean into placing those dice in various ways, not just spending the dice power, because dice powers are a little expensive for what you get. They're kind of more of a backup plan unless you got things to support it. But that's kind of where I'm at in the development pipeline right now. The nature deck, of course, is finished, and the charm deck is in playtesting right now.
Yeah, there's, I guess, between Royal Charm and Mindfog Owl, there's no other natural way of placing charm dice, I think, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. So, and like Daimona got 2 ways to do it with the Rayward Recruit and the Blessing of Lightning. Yeah. So, yeah, finding more ways to do that and have different payoffs for having those out and stuff. It's been cool.
It's been, I'm really excited for what this cycle holds. And obviously it's been a really busy moment for the game with a lot of things happening. So we've got a lot to talk about. Just to say what's on tap. We've got the new Red Rains mode, so the co-op mode, which is really exciting to see and has brought in a lot of fresh faces to the Discord and hopefully a lot of new subscribers to Team Covenant so we can keep the game going. And you also, in addition to the set dropping, have announced some new organized play rules, and for the first time in the game's history, I think, errata, including the promise to reprint those cards in future sets, which is really exciting. So we're gonna cover all that, but I know there's a lot of community interest in the Red Rains mode in particular, and we solicited questions from Discord. So some of these questions we'll ask come from community members, but maybe we can shift into that now. And Abby from Discord asked a question about the Red Rains mode. She said, "What gave you the idea for a cooperative version of Ashes?"
It started off as a really small idea. The original rule book kind of gives you the backstory of the Chimera very briefly. There's not a ton of codified lore out there for Ashes, but it's something that was mentioned, and that kind of already sets the stage for it to be like, oh, you could do Phoenixborn versus Chimera is like a part of the game. And seeing the success of other cooperative expandable card games was really motivating to want to try and capture that for Ashes. And a really special thing I think about Red Rains is that you have both competitive and cooperative elements within the same game system that you can't really get anywhere else. But yeah, it was the smallest little project starting off where it was kind of like a mini game for Ashes. I had 3 like Chimera parts on the table, and as you would defeat them, you'd flip them over and they'd flip back over. And I had even thought like, oh, maybe you would do like a half deck. You could bring like 5 dice and 15 cards. Just like, it was really small initially. I didn't think it was going to be like, oh, this will be the next product kind of surrounded this. And then as just development progressed, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's bigger than I thought it was going to be, that's for sure.
So when you started to develop it, as when you were thinking of it as this mini game, essentially, was there an idea in your mind that this would be a good introductory or onboarding product, or did that opportunity to use this as an on-ramp for more players, did that come later? And this is a question that Major Apollo from the Discord was asking.
As I started to see in the community just some level of exhaustion with high-level competitive play and like the refinement of the meta, like you go through the grind of tournaments and it's like you come out the other end changed. I wanted to add something a bit more refreshing and lighter to the game, because I know it's a hard game to play at the top level, and that depth just reveals itself more and more as you go deeper into it, which just makes it harder and harder to get better at in a way. So taking a step back there and making this a way for people to share their love of the game with other people that haven't played it before, or were put off by maybe what they've heard about competitive games or experience with competitive games. That way they're like, oh, you're just going to beat me. I don't know if I want to get into it the way you do. But now it's just like, we can just play together, and your skill just enhances their experience instead of going against it in a way, when people don't like to lose very much learning a game. So yeah, kind of both. It's another entry point. You just attach it onto the master set, so it's easy enough to get going there. I did want to include the dice to make it a standalone expansion, but we ended up not doing that. It already has a lot of stuff in it for
it's
the price
incredible
point.
Value for
really
like
good
$30.
Yeah. So I was like, oh man, can we get those dice in there? And ended up saying no to that, because it would have just been a single player standalone expansion then. And with the campaign mode being kind of, it revealed itself as the most fun way to play in play testing. It's like, well, you actually need other decks to do the campaign mode. So why don't we just make it a master set expansion? And then you have enough stuff for 2 people, do a little bit of campaign action. You got all the dice for the future stuff. We're not giving people redundant stuff that they don't need necessarily. So it was a tough choice navigating exactly what we wanted the product to end up as, but I'm happy with what we got.
One thing that I've read on different like game design forums and otherwise is that you have to do your research when you're designing something. So are you a big player of other solo games? Like, did you sort of go out and either, if you already had them, or buy other games, sort of the big ones, whether it's Arkham Horror or Marvel Champions or otherwise, and play those a lot in order to get ideas and see what worked and what didn't? Or did you just do reading? Or did you say, I'm just going to go on my own idea, and then once we get to play testing, flush out the bugs and make it a more complete system?
Yeah, oh man, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I dove into Arkham Horror like the weekend after I sent Red Rains to print. But I love Arkham Horror. I've played a lot of that with my friend, and there's just brilliant stuff going on in there. And I'm like, oh, I should have started this way sooner. But I was pretty heads down with Red Rain's development. I haven't given Marvel Champions much of a shot besides a demo at a convention one time, but I would like to go back and check that one out and just see what there is. But a lot of my play testers were big Arkham fans, Marvel Champions fans, and they kind of brought their wisdom to the table through their deep experience with that. So it wasn't entirely uninformed on what else is out there.
I mean, one of the things, yeah, I'm sure there's something you could have gleaned from Arkham. Like, I think what MJ's done in designing that game and building out the card pool's amazing, and the other designers who've collaborated on it. But I also think there's something just really, as you said, refreshing about the fact that Red Rains feels very authentically Ashes, and the way that you manage to keep the upkeep or just overhead of managing the Chimera turns very low. It's very different than Lord of the Rings LCG or Arkham or Marvel Champions. Like, all those games seem to inevitably move towards some pretty complex villain mechanics, which, who knows, maybe eventually the design space will require that, but the core Ashes mode feels like it's got so much room for interest just in what's happening on the battlefield that keeping the Chimera turn light still gives you a lot of space to play with. So it feels very different in a way that I almost worry that the Nick who'd played a bunch of Arkham might have been tempted into doing some of those things that I think might have diluted the experience.
Yeah, I would have built up my tolerance for more upkeep stuff. It's a trade-off, right? Like, Arkham gives you these fresh campaign and new scenarios every time. We're like, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like this before every time, but it requires more stuff on the table and more stuff to keep track of. And yeah, definitely my preference is staying just engaged on your turn. And it's like the nature of Ashes is already very back and forth, where it's just minor things happening between your turn and the opponent's turn, whether that's a person or the Chimera now. So having that be as distilled as possible so you can just maintain that same feeling of Ashes. So when you switch between the PvP mode and the PvE mode, you still feel like you're playing the same game. I wouldn't want it to be a radically different experience and maybe risk people only liking one of them. I want everyone to enjoy both of them.
Was there any moment or feature or thing that you either implemented or started, testing with, and it was just like, no, this isn't working at all, or something that you didn't think of that maybe came out of playtesting? You're like, oh my God, this is genius. Like, we have to include this and explore it more.
Yeah, definitely some very monumental moments throughout the development cycle. The main one was figuring out just like, okay, what is the Chimera going to like output at you? And I talked about how the very original draft was just like 3 units that would flip up and down. And it's like, well, that doesn't really give you like an arc of experience from beginning to end if you're just kind of like fighting the same 3 parts. So it needed to kind of match the output of the players, where it's like every round I'm going to do 10 dice worth of stuff towards you approximately. And that's kind of where the threat mechanic came from, where based on your difficulty, it's going to put out this many cards. And from there, it was working nice. It was like, okay, they're like summoning a new unit every turn, and you're like, oh man, but battle is just kind of predictable. I know when it's done flipping. I know when it's going to start attacking me, because this was before the D12 was added in at all. So it would just flip, and then attack. So it was like fine, but we were exploiting the system with like alert units and just attacking things. Like, it was like, okay, everything has stock. So like the tension of the game of Ashes wasn't quite there in the same way, where you could see the end too soon. And so that's where dice come in. Dice just make different things happen. So the behavior card came out of the dice roll where it's like, okay, what if you don't know if it's going to attack you? What if it rush attacks you? What if it attacks you with something you don't even know what it has yet? So those different behaviors kind of came out of that, and instantly that just breathed so much life into the game. And now that we had that die, then we could also do the guard roll thing where it's like, what if your attack just didn't go the way you expected? And that's probably one of the more divisive mechanics in the game where it's like, oh man, like my master plan, I was all set to make this perfect attack and it just happened to guard it, and now it's a disaster. But I think it's funny, and those moments that you can like lament together are actually a positive play experience, I think. So it helps tell stories, and just adding that variability and randomness to the game is how you stay engaged in kind of a narrative arc of your own game, and how it can feel different every time.
Yeah, I feel like that little bit of variance goes such a long way to keeping the story fresh from game to game, and making those big swingy moments happen. I think for some folks it can find it frustrating, but trying to split that difference between giving the players a sense of like they're in control and they have power in the situation, while also not making it so linear that it's just a game of backwards induction where you're like, yeah, I can plan out my entire round from the moment I flip my cards over and see what my dice roll is, I think is really, really fun.
Yeah, and now I'm getting into like devil mode where I keep wanting to make it like even more nasty and rude with the next chimera.
Oh, you have been playing Arkham, I can tell.
Yeah. So that has definitely crept in where I'm like, oh, I love when everything goes wrong now.
So when you watch a testing game or you participate in a testing game, do you root for the chimera or for the players?
I gotta say I root for the chimera now. I do. And part of that is it's like feedback for me that I'm like, okay, the system is working. It's going to present challenges to players for them to solve. And that's just what you're looking for in a game. If it was a victory every time, you wouldn't really have a reason to keep playing it again. And the losses hurt. I mean, they totally do, especially if you're like in your campaign and you're like, okay, here we go, level 3. I really hope I can win this one, and you lose. It's like, oh man. But I'm also a big Slay the Spire fan, so I'm used to just losing almost all the time, and still having fun with that. So I think there's a very different tone of winning versus losing when it is a PvE or like solo game experience versus the head-to-head competitive where those bad bees can just really hurt.
So then what is like, how did you decide this is the most? Like, obviously you would have had to play through all the different type of threat levels. When did you decide, okay, if it gets any harder, it's just not fun, but this is still like, this is going to be a peak challenge for the majority of people who get into the game?
Yeah, we definitely exceeded difficulty from where it is now. It wasn't just like trying to make it stronger until we found the right point. It has been way too strong at points. There were aspects that it was like a core mechanic. There was a keyword called surge on cards, and when they would come into play, they would just add another aspect to the table, which is like the third ultimate on the Chimera now. So like a really gated ability at the very end of the game. But it was just like kind of a core mechanic. So you would get some battlefields that would just explode with like 5 more units, and you're like, okay, we can't really control that. And
Meteor.
Exactly. And Meteor came up all the time. Meteor was a big point of figuring out this mode, and it kind of kept us honest. We're like, if the only solution to beating this is like making a giant alert defender that can tank infinite attacks or Meteor the whole board, then it's a problem. So we kind of had those touchstones in place. And Meteor was also a really good example of figuring out the design of stuff. We have the Laws of Chimera section in the rule book that basically addresses a handful of card types and interactions that didn't have a good answer in the core rules. So AoE spells like Meteor being one of them, were like, Yeah, we could just let it be all units means all units, but then for 2 dice, you're deleting so much material that it just didn't make the game very fun to have something that OP. So, yeah, Meteor has continued to be one of those cards.
So I'd be curious if you've talked a lot about it. Sounds like some really important moments in testing, but like, do you remember a moment or a game where you felt like, oh man, this is really coming together. Like this is really fun. I would want to play this a few dozen more times. Like a card interaction or even just a campaign experience you had.
Yeah, I would say definitely the early games of adding in the D12 were huge. Where I'm like, oh man, I suddenly feel those moments of anticipation and release, whether it's good or bad, the outcome. It was like that's what I was missing, was that drama of every turn, and things could go bad at any time. Who knows what's going to happen? It started just adding dialogue between players, like, what if this flips up? What if this flips up? If it does this attack, are we ready for that? So it just kind of brought the table experience alive just by adding that die. So I look at that as a really important moment in the development of the game. And another big one was campaign mode, where when we were playtesting it and figuring out like how difficulty levels were going to work, because that went through a variety of systems, and we were just like playtesting with our decks, like our competitive decks, our playtest decks, whatever. It's just like pick a deck and play it. And we didn't really have a good way to line up where a deck should be with what the power level of the Chimera should be. So it was like, okay, well, we can start with a precon, right? And make the lowest difficulty appropriate for as many precons as possible. And from there, the idea of campaign mode came out, where it's like I said, I'm a big Slay the Spire player. So I was like, okay, what if you could like deck build cards between game modes? And the idea of progression kind of came from there. And then that got us playing with way more cards in the card pool, because we're like, okay, I'll take Daimona, I'll take Astria, like whatever. We were just trying all the precons now, and we would have so many moments of like, I can't believe how good this card is in this mode. Like, this is such a stinker and competitive. Nobody uses it, but like, oh, it's an MVP in this mode. A really good example of that is Goran Rock Brawler. It's like my favorite card in Red Rains, because the Chimera isn't smart enough to dispatch it immediately. So you get to that 6 token threshold on Goran Rock Brawler and you get the big refresh. So like all my big stompy cards are a lot more playable in that mode. And so it's just fun. We're like, I can't believe how much there is to explore with these cards that were just kind of off on the sidelines, because they just don't make that like efficiency cut or whatever for a top tier competitive deck. So campaign mode was another huge part for the game.
So where do you draw the line? I mean, obviously, you can't, by nature of the design process and having to release to the subscribers and the players, continue forever in development mode. So at what point do you or does Plaid Hat say, okay, we like this is our cutoff date, and how does that impact your decision making on like, oh, I just wish I could do one more thing, or you know what, we can actually cut it here and leave this for a future set and everything else is good enough right now?
Oh yeah. So as for setting deadlines, we have roughly the expectation with the subscription model, like quarterly releases, and it's been a little bit slower than that overall, and there was definitely going to be a bigger gap between the Tristan and Rowan set and the PvE mode, just by the nature of developing a new game mode, but we figured that would be worth it. And honestly, one of the most challenging moments of design was when I brought it to Colby and I'm like, okay, like here's where it's at. What do you think? I think I'm ready to send this off. And he was like, this isn't good enough yet. The Chimera needs dice for like, because we were working on the rule book together, and this was before Rage Dice. My final submission didn't have rage dice.
This is like, D12, but no
that's
rage
cool.
dice.
Okay.
Yeah, so like I had a lot of these like substitution effects where it's like if you would lower the Chimera's dice, instead reduce its behavior roll by 2, like on its next turn. And there were like tokens to track that. So there was like that we put a lot of effort into making the card pool fully compatible as much as we could, but it needed to be more direct one-to-one. Colby thought that those substitute effects, and like you can even see some ghosts of it with like the way the Chimera's hand works. It's like, okay, what if you have to like discard a card from its hand? Like we have to make up an answer for that. So we spent a lot of time right at the end going through different ideas that would make that more one-to-one with what players could expect from the PvP text to the PvE text, while also making sure we weren't going to completely destroy the balance we had worked on for the mode up until this point that we were really happy with. So Rage Dice was a very late addition to the game, and I really can't imagine it without it now. It feels really integral to things and really simple, and I'm so happy we have the more direct comparison of dice for the Chimera, and that was really worth it.
They look so good. I love the way they look on the table, slotting them into the board. I mean, it's little.
Everyone
little
loves
things.
dice. Yeah, everyone loves dice. That's awesome.
Especially an Ashes player. So Impossible German, who has not been shy to share that he's on the playtesting team, passed along a question, which was, what did the journey to design Red Rains teach you about design, and do you look at Ashes differently now that you have both design and development under your belt, now that you've actually developed a whole new game mode?
Okay, what did I learn about design? I think it's really important to pay attention to emotions in games and not get too hyper focused on like balance of stuff. So like all the most meaningful moments in Red Rain's development were when we were excited about something, whether it was the uncertainty of the dice rolling or the sense of progression of the campaign system. So I play very emotionally when I play these games, and what would be known as like a Timmy player, if you know the psychographics. I'm such a Timmy when I play now, and I think that goes a long way. I think it has built up a good intuition in me for when like something is right or not right. It's like I'll play test a card and I'll just be like, that just wasn't fun enough. It's not cool enough. And it's like, balance, whatever. Like we'll get there at the end, but they got to have that spark of like, that's cool. And that's really important and pretty core to my design philosophy now. And what else?
Do you look at Ashes any differently, like as a whole? Did it change the way you look at the game?
Precons matter a whole lot more now, and they've always been a way that players would be introduced to the game, and a lot of players keep their collection that way, and we'll just play it as like a pre-constructed game. And then you have the competitive community online who moves past that quickly and gets right into the full experience. But now there's a reason to really focus on precons, and because they're a starting point for playing Red Rains now more than ever. So I really want to make those cohesive ideas with a lot of fun and directions they can go with deck building kind of innately. So yeah, even more of a joy on precon. And also I feel like I have more freedom to get away with making the Goron Rock brawlers of the card pool, because you can experience those cards in all their glory now, whereas if you're playing at the top table, they aren't going to make the cut. So I feel like I get to make more fun cards now and see those experiences realized.
So do you have any sort of goal when you're designing to say, okay, I need, we're only ever going to have 10 plus the uniques, but like 10 cards or 9 cards in the next set, and I want at least half of them to be, PvP sort of focused, where people who want to play competitively, like, these are going to be good for them. And then a couple just real fun Timmy cards that might not be, PvP, focused, but they're going to be really fun to play against the Chimera. And then the rest will fall somewhere in between? Or do you just sort of go with a bunch of ideas and then however it pans out, is just the way it is?
Yeah. I don't set a particular quota that I have to meet for like each of them. It's the early play testing. We really adopt the philosophy of find the fun. And if it's a fun card because it fits a lot of decks or creates new archetypes or is like just what the meta needed, those are all good PvP things that kind of show us that it's a design worth going forward with. Or it's like, oh man, like I got this dream deck around this one card, and Calamity Golem's a good example of that, where it's like, oh man, if you get a good Calamity Golem turn, it is so cool. But it's like, it dies to Fester with the turn you summon it. It's terrible. Like, so it's, you would love for each card to check all the boxes of like competitively viable, fun for everybody, whatever. But you kind of go where those designs go. If it's a really good card for one area, okay, we'll do that. If it's a trade-off that it's not going to be super competitively viable, but it inspires those players to pick them up and try those things, like that is also value. So I do try and have a mix of it, and you never know when somebody's going to surprise you with the value of a card like Reimagine, huh?
Yeah. Reimagine and Keepsake together.
Revindicated, right now.
I mean, to the credit of the folks in our community too, I think, even the players at the very top tables, like, are really interested in self-expression and deck building a lot of the time. And like, Carl's done some amazing things with like Rowan, and like those decks, when I looked at them before I'd played against them, they read as kind of janky to me, but they're actually really powerful. And that's definitely how I would interpret Lark's Mono Illusion deck. I would have thought, that's some wild ideas in there, good luck. But
nobody would have said that would get anywhere. No, I don't think a single person outside of Lark would have had faith that it would perform that well. I mean, just so many congratulations to him. But I would still classify it as janky.
So you mentioned, as you were talking about the cards, that sometimes you think about the meta and whether there are good responses to in a new set to the meta. How closely do you track the meta? Obviously, like, you're playing in tournaments, so it's probably about as closely as any of us tracks it. But do you actively think about the meta impact of cards in a set?
Do you lurk in all the tournaments?
Yeah, I do. I do lurk around the Discord for sure. I keep up with everything, and playing competitively has been fun. Whether it was with some of the earlier Shuffle Bus stuff or Phoenix League now, I find it really valuable to get that hands-on experience. So when I see differing opinions, I can have perspective on both of those. Like, oh, I've also experienced that, or I haven't seen that yet. Can you show me that in a playtest game, how that works? It's really important for me to have the actual experience, because you can't sort out the answer just talking about it. And so many debates on a card in playtesting have kind of been put to rest just by playing a game or two. Just getting it to the table. So I love having the on-hands experience. So, and then like the playtest group, it's your peers, it's other players in the tournaments and stuff. Like, they make up the playtest team. There's not, I don't really think hardly any playtesters that just playtest and aren't also active members of the community. So it's like, them, and we're all kind of having a shared experience with our small online community. So I hope I'm dialed in enough.
Do you seek to sort of, with each set, push and pull the different archetypes and speed of the game? So, before Corpse of Viros, most people would say that we were in a very fast, low to the ground meta, especially with what we have endearingly called Value Town or Snappermander, which was Seafoam Snapper and Salamander Monk being the core of all.
Or Salsa Napper, if you're me specifically.
Yeah, which was sort of the core of a lot of decks. And obviously, Hope was very big with Creepers and sort of all those pieces played together where we were a lot of very fast, aggressive decks. And now it seems that, especially with the wound heavy mechanic, that can punish, low life units. And so we're starting to move a little bit more to the medium and tall side of things. Do you actively work on balancing those things or sort of guiding the meta one way or another?
I think it can be a trap to try and respond too on the nose with each set, and designing cards to, maybe it has this nice edge against this popular thing right now, but at the expense of like added card text, or you're like, wait, why does it do this or whatever? So my priority is making a self-contained expansion, like of its own merit first, and hopefully it interacts in an interesting way with the rest of the meta. It can't always be one-upping the next thing there, where it's like, oh man, how are we going to make something that defeats Salamander Monk? And if we went ahead and did that, we would just be creating more problems. Like you can't go over the top and beat the best things are out there, which is why we ended up doing errata. It was an answer I didn't feel like we could answer with the chain list, and we had gone forward with doing errata for our other game, Summoner Wars, so the door was open for me to ask for some Ashes errata as well. So we lucked out there, and hopefully we made the right call. Errata is a really tricky thing because it messes with the distribution of the game, the presentation of the game, and you better get it right the first time you do it, because you're putting it out there in a kind of unchangeable way again. You really don't want to errata card a second time. So as for responding to the meta, oftentimes it will kind of like have this slingshot effect where it's like, okay, we're designing maybe 2 sets ahead of what is currently released. And if we start trying to address that meta with this set, we kind of might miss the mark. We don't even get a chance for the upcoming meta to be fully realized before we make these design decisions. So that's kind of another reason why I don't want to be too on the nose with any addressing the meta types of things with set releases, because we might be wrong. We might have already solved it. Like there's been several changes to the meta in terms of like healing. Like we're getting these longer games because we got this Phoenix Attendant Chant of Transfusion engine going right now, where it's like, oh man, it begs the question, like, does Brennan even need to be nerfed in this healing meta? But like, we've been sets ahead where we're like, okay, we know we need healing. We know we need to slow things down. So even in like the nature set coming up, there's like one more source of healing where it's like, oh, I think we might need another one. But the reality is, in playtesting, we don't get the full scope of the meta. We just can't, because the majority of our games are played with versions of the card that don't make the final cut, because they're always changing. So by the time we get to the final version, it's like, okay, we have just the tail end of testing to see it all finalized. In some cards, we knock it out of the park early and we get a good read on them, but some cards are changing up to the very last minute and we just don't know fully what their impact is going to be. So yeah, all things meta. I hope that our sets are always interesting and have an impact, but aren't ever too on the nose or too reactive.
So obviously, as part of Red Rains and focusing on the mono colors again, do you have their identities sort of mapped out and how they fit into either sort of swing style decks or mill decks or burn decks, and how you want to evolve those identities, moving forward?
Yeah, so I think each of the magic types can kind of dip their toes into a little bit of everything. Like if we take ceremonial, for example, it's got burn for sure. It doesn't quite have mill, but it has some like healing and recovering of stuff, like recurring allies and stuff that can help with the more like attrition side of things. And it also has some good swinging units. So I think every color can kind of play into like that damage trinity that kind of determines your archetype. And what I really want to do with each of these mono sets is pick a core design theme that I think a lot of different cards can express and hook into in different ways. So yeah, with ceremonial, it was wound tokens for sure. And when I give myself a restriction like that or a theme that I want to focus on, it helps me design stuff and come up with things I might not have otherwise thought about if I was like, oh, what if we need like another summon? What could like a summon do? But by forcing us to incorporate in the theme of wounds, it's like how you get Bone Crow. Okay, what does a summon do that focuses on wounds? Oh, it's stronger if it attacks something wounded. Blood Golem, it blows things up equal to wounds. And Chant of Transfusion. Okay, now we got this whole wound token economy going. All these cards can start interacting with each other, and you get those satisfying combos together. So for like the upcoming nature deck, with alterations being the main theme, there's like, okay, how do we get more value out of alterations? And there's the Ember Heart, which is a new ally. When she comes into play, she can borrow an alteration from another unit. So you're like, oh, I'm copying over that effect. And what if that alteration has an effect that triggers when it attaches to something? Okay, now you're doing it like another time. So that's some things you can kind of look forward to there. Or there's a refresh spell in the deck where it's like, oh, if you refresh a unit with an alteration, they're more likely to stick around because you buffed them up, and then you get to use the alteration again. So those central themes really spark a lot of the inspiration to kind of making them cohesive identities.
It also makes them better precons.
Yeah. Red King's going to be salivating at the idea of more alterations and interacting.
Yeah. The reinforce champion.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just to go back to the errata just very briefly, I mean, one, just want to commend you for what sounds like seizing an opportunity that Plaid Hat and Colby opened. Maybe they didn't realize they'd opened it, but you got in there and seized it. And I mean, you took some really big swings on that one, right? Like you targeted Brennan, who's the winningest Phoenix-born, Salamander Monk, which is probably the most frequently used conjuration, and Three-Eyed Owl, which was like the bogeyman of every new player to Ashes for years. And you were bringing that one back in. I mean, like, those... You weren't looking for bunt singles there, like, to use a baseball metaphor. Like,
and creepers too, yeah, which was also the other boogeyman in the meta.
How are you feeling about the early returns on those changes? Like, do you feel like they're looking good right now?
I think they're good. I think Charm is really appreciating a premium conjuration back in their card pool. I think all the comments of people saying, man, maybe some of these cards have gotten better than their previous versions in a weird way. I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I think straight up Owl, it doesn't have to exhaust to take a card now, but we smoothed out the experience by which it does that. So we did take some risks there. We pushed forward with what we felt were the most interesting designs and felt safest in terms of aligning with the values of the game that are really important, that are baked into a lot of what the chainless has to offer. And yeah, but everyone has had so much experience with a card like Salamander Monk that it's easy to describe why it is over the top doing what it's doing. And shifting that over to a new role is, I think, something worth doing.
I'm on the side of, at least for the style of decks I tend to play, I think Salamander Monk got a buff, or at least in the decks where you want to sort of sit back and have that extra defender. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the change to Three-Eyed Owl, I think, was my favorite change. Not necessarily the most necessary. I think Bren was the most necessary change, and I'm really happy to see where that ended up. But it's just so cool to have a card that a lot of people really enjoyed playing, but that just specifically because of round 1, turn 2, or turn 3, I guess, was not, it just ruined the experience for a lot of people. And so it's really cool now to see that small change of just doing it at the start of round for free. And that fixed everything. Is genius.
I hope
Agreed.
It works out okay.
An awesome interaction with Crypt Guardian too, that you can still actually get the Crypt Guardian value by exhausting that owl before it can do its prepare phase thing. It's very cool. Yeah. Should we do a little quick fire round treatment? Pepper some quick questions at Nick?
Yeah, well, I got one more question, just in regards specifically to errata. So now that, I mean, some people will see this as the door's open. So do you have any sort of restrictions or hard, fast rule that you're saying, okay, errata are only ever going to be as sort of like a nerf hammer to problematic cards? Or do you see it as potentially an opportunity to buff up some cards that are virtually unplayed, or, that you think have a really cool core idea, and instead of having to design a brand new card that just sort of changes it to make it viable, you could reprint it?
I definitely want to be as cautious with errata as possible. I kind of laid out some of the challenges with doing errata in the first place already, where you have to get it right, and it adds confusion into the product ecosystem overall. So I hope I don't have to do them ever again, but it's certainly desirable to be like, oh man, what if Blue Jaguar had 2 attacks, for example? What if
Flora.
Yeah.
She's gonna be so happy.
There's like all those questions of like, oh man, what if we did this one? What if we did this one? And it's like a lot of what the whole reborn process was too, where it's like, okay, we have all this potential, but you really have to respect the limits of how far you should go with it. And I think we really strategically targeted cards this time around. Also notable that none of the cards on this errata list have a white card back, so none of them are shuffled into your deck. So like the print and play route of these is a little bit more easy to deal with, where it's like it's just a Conjuration or your Phoenix Born. It's just one less issue. Not like we wouldn't errata a white back card if we had to, but it was a nice bonus, kind of focusing on these ones.
Right on. We have just a couple questions as a quick fire round, so just sort of whatever comes to the top of your head when we ask. Shmen, do you want to start or go through them?
Yeah, sure. So what's your favorite? So we know Jess is your favorite Phoenix Born, so I'm not going to ask about that one. But what's your favorite non-Phoenix Born card?
Oh, I think I gotta give it to Fighting Spirit. That card's just fun. I love punching big.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Did you specifically give the art direction of Falcon Punch from Super Smash Brothers, or was that just a happy accident?
Never tell.
Biggest surprise of a card that was better than you thought or planned, or maybe hoped?
Hope probably was the one I did not expect. I mean, for like almost all of playtesting, it was like, oh yeah, Daimona looks like the strong Phoenix Born of this set, with just these big, strong allies that are really effective. Because there was, around that time of the game, like in development, like Swarm or like these low to the ground units weren't like a thing, and that's where the inspiration of Hope really came from. I was like, what if there's a way to make these little units like good? And so Hope was kind of a shot that way, and I really underestimated the power of duplicating the 2-cost units. I did most of my Hope play testing with stuff like Salamander, which is still a great duplicate target, pre-errata and maybe even post-errata, who knows. But I would see the stuff like the the creeper, like I got a Hope creeper deck played against it, and I'm like, wow, that was cool. Like I didn't think about that, and then it's like, oh boy, I should have thought a lot harder about that one, huh? So I was definitely more surprised by Hope, and it just goes to show you like how much there is to learn about this game in terms of like challenging the conventional wisdom of the game, looking at like the tournament games we play and just the decks people come up with and the card synergies and design, these new playtesting ideas, just totally shifting the paradigms of the game. Simply just like who would have thought a chant would be maybe the best card of the new set.
Yeah.
So it just really makes me have to double check everything before giving the go ahead on stuff. And it's easy for me to be like, oh, that was cool, that'll be fun, people will like that, and then it's like the meta tyrant for the next several months.
Did you have what about a biggest disappointment of a card that fell flat when you thought it would really have an impact?
Oh, Piercing Light.
Yeah.
I want that card so badly, but rest assured I'm gonna be doing everything I can to support it with the Divine set coming up. Not just for Piercing Light's sake, but I think that is just a fun way to express divine magic in the game. So man, if only that card gave a divine die when you put it into play.
Yeah.
That would have been powerful.
Or an errata on book tax, maybe.
Ooh. I don't like free cards. I just don't like free stuff anymore.
Well, I listened to your podcast when you were with the Team Covenant guys about the sins of design, and I know that was one of the big problems. I don't remember all the examples at this point, but free is such a dangerous game to play. What's the card that is the most underplayed that should be played more for you?
Ooh, man, I don't think I'm the best person to answer this. I will say the card that has trounced me in playtesting the most lately has been Shield Mage. I'll say Shield Mage.
Nice. Okay.
So Shield Mage support coming?
Not even necessarily, just just getting the most out of it. It's been impressive seeing Shield
Very
Mage.
Cool.
And it comes down, I'm like, oh my gosh, that has 2 life, and just you run out of ways to answer all these units. It looks so unassuming, like, oh, 2 dice for an O2, like you can just defeat that with like anything, but among a bunch of other stuff, it really adds up. So get your Shield Mages out.
That's a good call. I think specifically in the current cards, Sun Sister is another that needs to see more play with all the wounds flying around.
Oh, can Sun Sister heal opponents' stuff?
I don't think so.
I don't think it can. Probably not. That's something I wanted to have done. Yeah.
I mean, you could start doing Butterfly Monk shenanigans where you
yeah, that's one that can do it.
Play Final Cry and then heal the old salt on the opposing side so that they can't do anything.
Yeah, I don't think your opponent will be too upset about that.
And I have one final question that I think everyone has been asking about on not just Ashes, but the Team Covenant. What about OP kits and, any other Ashes, Plaid Hat sort of, product, like playmats or anything else? Are we going to see anything?
People really want playmats.
We really need playmats.
I've heard the call for playmats, and I have mentioned it.
Chimera plushies.
We probably won't do another OP kit. We had a lot of leftovers of those, and you have to do a certain size print run of things for it to be viable to ship it over. So the first one was fun, but we ended up with too many of them to probably consider doing it that way again. But I would say what we did with like the translucent dice and the blood puppets, just like having things on hand that we can send out for Ash Cons and bring with us easily to Gen Con and stuff like that. Once the last wave of prizes feel like they maybe are about to overstay their welcome, I'll try and get some new stuff in there. One thing that I guess it's worth asking if people even want this before we go ahead and make it, but I thought it would be cool to make like a playing deck of 52 cards and like have the suits be like the 4 original Magic classes, and then you just have like all the good Ashes art on your card.
That would be cool. I'd be.
That's
down
interesting.
For that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's such an easy idea. I think you could have a lot of fun with the actual iconography of it too, or the Jokers, like the face cards. Those could be cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of good characters to put on those. So that was an idea I've been sitting on for a little bit. We haven't gone forward with new prizes yet, but...
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had leftover OP kits, but as the father of twins who are finding it very difficult to split the Miss Spirit plushie, I was happy to be able to buy an extra one when those went on sale. So that was super handy.
Yeah, I'm glad we did those plushies. I've seen a lot of cute pictures of kids with those, so I'm glad those exist in the world.
Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This was awesome, and it was great to hear about the development process of Red Rains and how you think about the sets. Really excited for the future of Ashes, and to even get a little spoiler on one of the cards coming. That's super cool to hear about. What was the name of it?
It's been an absolute pleasure. What's that?
What was the name of that card?
Oh, Emberheart.
Emberheart.
Natural ally. I think you can see the art in the preview article for that set.
Yeah, we could see the title, but we didn't see the text, so that's cool.
Yeah. All right, a little bonus for you. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great. I love talking about the game, and hope people enjoy this episode.
Absolutely. No, this has been great, and can't wait to see what's next. And then we'll have to have you on regularly so we can just keep picking your brain.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk the next set with you guys. No problem.
That's awesome. All right.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep. See you later.
See ya. Shmen, you want to do the sign-off?
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't make Nick do that. And I don't even know why we do it. The intern who quit came up with it, but, if you're not janky, you're stanky.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao.
Thanks.